Yeah, that's the general sense I get from Toei these days. Yeah, I know I recently did a whole video where I basically praised this company for the characters and franchises they've created, and much of that still does hold true. But I also have to acknowledge when they make a lot of bonehead decisions. Most notably, when they try to fix what's not broken. They just seem to have a bad habit of overreacting when things aren't getting over, ignoring the fact that some things aren't going to catch on immediately, or that sometimes their properties are just going to have some down periods. I bring this up because this series, and what it brought to the table while critically acclaimed, especially here in the West, unfortunately bombed hard in its home country. Allegedly, one of the key factors to its failings were a bunch of angry Karens.
Oh, there you are! I'll be looking for you! I came all the way!
No, not that one. She's actually kind of fun. I mean, the overly concerned mothers of Japan, who allegedly sent many complaints to Toei about the show, saying that it was too violent and that they were going to forbid their daughters from watching any more of their shows, and more importantly, would stop buying their toys. Personally, while I do find some plausibility to this claim, because let's face it, angry moms will always be a thing, I highly doubt it was the only contributing factor to its failings. After all, Precure had always had plenty of CQC, and certainly wasn't short of emotionally scarring moments for every age. Personally, I think a far more significant factor to its failings was the fact that 2015 was just not a good year for Toei in general. This was the same year that Toei got the bright idea to make another Ninja Super Sentai that overrelied on cameos from the past without properly building the current team they had. And while Kamen Rider Drive was a good series in my opinion, it didn't bring in the numbers for much of 2015, and Kamen Rider Ghost didn't hold up much better and in my opinion was an unfocused mess of a story. Ironically, I do think it could have been a great show if it hadn't had its budget and manpower split with the actually overly violent edgelord of the Rider franchise, Amazons. Don't look this up if you want to maintain your innocence. And if you don't have people watching the shows that aired first in the time schedule, chances are they're not going to stay tuned for the show after. All of that, and I think Happiness Charge might have caused a little burnout for some more dedicated fans. Now again, I don't think that series was quite as bad as some have made it out to be, as I did kind of defend it during my reviews of it, but I also can't deny that final arc was just not good, and when you end your series on such a meh note, chances are that people aren't going to be excited for the next one. Thus, in spite of this series having a lot of elements worth a ton of praise, it was a huge financial failure and unfortunately caused a very unnecessary shakeup in the franchise. I'll get more into this fallout when I review those series, but I will say I probably also should have brought it up more in my Toei Trinity video. Because after this show, the following series seemed to actively try and stray away from their Tokusatsu brethren more than ever out of fear of getting more complaints from the Karens. Personally, I do still think they were moving away from Tokusatsu by the time of Happiness Charge, but this show's failings might have greatly sped up the process. And it would take until the beginning of the Reiwa era of Japan before they worked up the guts to start inviting not just the Tokusatsu writers back in, but also some brand new writers from outside of the franchise rather than just going back to the old guard. So I guess you could consider this intro a bit of an appendment to that video. With all that said, what do I think about this show itself? Well, as I said, this is still very much considered critically to be one of the top tier series of the entire franchise. So much so that I even hastily threw together a review of it shortly after it finished airing, only for it to get copyright claim because I used a lot of longer clips with sound back then. Yeah, you gotta go through all kinds of hoops to make stuff for this stupid platform. Still, looking back on it, that review felt more than a little incomplete, especially compared to my current format, so I think it's high time I gave this series its much deserved dues. With that, let's take a look at the acclaimed flop that is Gold Princess Precure. Yeah, this is the one series where I actually own the toys for it. Don't look at me like that. Our series opened with a little girl being teased by her classmates over her dreams of becoming a princess. Don't worry about it too much, kid. Just blame Disney for over-trivializing the term. Fortunately, she was comforted by this boy and his feathery coat and shorts combo. I'd also comment about his hair color, but there's just so much else going on here I don't know where to begin. The main takeaway was that he was named Kanata, and he gave the girl the obvious MacGuffin of the series. We then got the show's opening, which I really liked. Not so much for the music and visuals. I mean, they're both good, especially this clever little bit where the lyrics perfectly matched up with the names of the characters on the screen, though overall I think I have seen better. What I'm talking about is the little details we'll see over the course of this series, like just remember this cut here for later. Anyway, we then jumped ahead several years later, where the girl named Haruka Haruno was on her way to her first day of school. Would you believe this VA previously played the sadistic Annie Leonhardt and then later the CEO of Amazonist.com? Yeah, if Haruka had ended up like either of them, I think I would understand why the Karens had a bit of an issue with the show. Then again, considering that her dad is the Attack Titan, maybe we're not that far off. Anyway, Haruka had enrolled in Noble Academy, a super high-class private school, and dorms, much to Daddy Titan's dismay. Obviously, she had chosen this particular academy in pursuit of her dream of achieving princesshood. Granted, she was a bit too much of a spaz for such a title, even when compared to her roommate, Yui Nanase. Delusions aside, Yuri proceeded to give her new roommate a little tour of the campus. Along the way, they ran into the student council president, Minami Kaido. Yeah guys, I like the color blue as much as the next guy, but could we tone it down a little? It's starting to really hurt my retinas. Though one student who wasn't blinded by all of her blueness was a very casual gal girl named Kirara Amanogawa. Anyone want to bet she and Hinata are part of the same Facebook group? After the little tour, Yui and Haruka sat down for some exposition dumps, explaining how the school had produced many famous people. Yui in particular had dreams of becoming a famous picture book author. Well, if you happen to have a twin, I'm pretty sure you could get right to work on that stuff. Of course, she then asked Haruka if she had dreams of her own, but as had been previously established, she was a little embarrassed of her dreams. After all, not only did she have no concrete plan to achieve something that's usually decided based on bloodlines, but there was still the slight trauma of those boys who made fun of her. Thus, she tried to avoid both the question and Yui. Disappointed by her own cowardice, Haruka could only look at the little trinket that Kanata had given her. However, she was snapped out of her stupor with the traditional fairy run-in.
I really wanted to know the truth, even though he said it was for my sake, but he made me feel like an idiot.
I love it when I could get a little extra mileage out of one clip for the same video. Haruka gave the most appropriate response for someone in her position, but honestly, I've become so jaded to this stuff that I don't see any big deal when this pup named Puff talked, or when this parakeet named Aroma arrived and... Did that dog just call the bird her brother? Excuse me, I just need to go into the thinking corner for a minute. After fixing up Puff's hair, Aroma revealed why they were in the human world to begin with. Is Monokuma about to launch an attack? Because if at all possible, can we just stop at 2? Because anything after that is a bit messy. Well, no, it wasn't a meme-spewing black and white bear, but rather this gentleman named Close. Yeah, dude, I think you're a little late for the Mad Max auditions. Obviously, he was an agent of the villain faction of the season, Distark, who sought to prevent the rebirth of the Princess Precure. To do so, he and his allies had the ability to lock away a person's dreams and use that as a catalyst to create monsters known as the Zetzborgs. Thus, Yui became the series' first victim of the week, horrifying her friend who wanted to save her, but obviously didn't have the power to do so yet. And of course, Close then egged Haruka into admitting what her dream was. With that, the trinket she got from Kanata reacted and turned into a key. Well, as long as it doesn't involve some weird DJ dude who expects you to turn into a fruit-powered space god. Thus, we got our first transformation of the season, and just to save time, I'll say all of these sequences are amazing. I could honestly care less about all the singing or giant staircases out of nowhere. All these sequences not only have some nice poses and dancing, but these final shots of the Cures doing their little curtsies while all the effects go off in the background is just amazing. It even kind of made up for this weird CGI we suddenly got for this panning shot. Granted, it could be much worse. Of course, we went through the usual Pink Cure debut shtick, including the big jump and skewed priorities. However, after a catchphrase and posing that would make the Joestars proud, we got the thing this show is really known for, its insane sakuga. From the brilliant choreography to all the pedals in the fore and background, this was arguably one of the best first episode fights of the franchise, which always tend to look good because you kind of need a hook for your new show and everything. But little would we know, this was just the tip of the iceberg. Granted, I was never a huge fan of any of the finishers in the show because it's more CGI that seems to turn our heroines into Elastigirl, but it was a small price to pay for all of this, plus at least it wasn't spam for the most part. And I'll say this Gokigen Yo at the end was pretty cool at least. With that, Haruka released Yuri with her key that was way too small. Yeah guys, that's not how locks work, but whatever. This also allowed the fairies to get some proper introductions in, including how they were assigned their mission by Kanata, who they introduced through their really fat tablet. Yeah, anyone else remember how thick some of the old tablets were? I actually still own my first iPad that I use to prop up my mousepad these days. Also, we got to learn Kanata's full, really pompous name. Seriously, why can't royals in this franchise just have short names like Bob or Sally? But yeah, with that, this first and really good introduction to the series ended with Haruka learning that the boy from her past was a prince. Overall, this did a really good job introducing all of our main leads and their general personalities, while also giving us a good idea of the show's major concepts and themes without overloading us, and most of all, gave us the first great fight scene of the series that would be far from the last we'd see in the show. With that, we rolled into episode 2 with Haruka learning more about Kanata and how he was currently MIA, but more importantly, she learned that she was in fact not a proper princess yet. I mean, yeah, she was still worried about the guy, but this also does show that Haruka is starting off the series by not taking this whole princess thing all that seriously, and that she would have to develop out of that mindset. And to her credit, she did have the drive to do so. On a side note, starting from this episode, we can see why this cut featured a wide shot of Haruka alone at first, as Yuri was added in, and there would be a lot more students to come, but we'll just check back in one more time right before the end of this video. The next day on the beach, Minami managed to find a familiar looking trinket wash up onto the shore. Ah geez, Seawater's really gonna hurt the resale value on this. She also caught a glimpse of Haruka being admirably proactive towards her princess goals by doing a little boring jog to build up her stamina. What wasn't as admirable was her poor time management. Not helped by the fact that this school had some big overly dramatic doors that students had to enter through. Fortunately, Minami managed to negotiate with strict teacher stereotype number 532 here to have the punishment for her tardiness be reduced. Specifically, she had so that Haruka would decide her own punishment, which she complied with through very practical means, weed pulling. Again, I like that while she can be a bit of a spaz, Haruka does at least have the common sense to try and approach most things sensibly. Her sometimes idiotic tendencies are not her defining characteristic. Granted, it didn't stop her from being a little overly excitable, such as when she learned how much of a freaking superhuman Minami was and figured that she could learn how to be a proper princess through her. Thus, after handing in a written apology, she asked if she could teach her ballet. Surprisingly, it wasn't easy, and led to all sorts of memeable faces as well as dirty joke material for the Joushishin authors. I'm not kidding, I actually own one of those books, and no, it's not R18 stuff, so I actually might cover this on a future date, though I might have to do at least a little bit of editing. Still, the lessons were going well until Haruka decided to try some more advanced techniques that, oof. Yeah, nothing graphic here or anything, but chances are good you've kind of missed your step like this. Obviously not to this degree, but still, damn. Minami saw this, and while she rightfully chewed her out a little, she quickly helped wrap Haruka's sprained ankle. This gave the two an opportunity to interact and learn a little bit more about each other.
私は完璧じゃないわ。バレエも小さな頃から練習して
Like many blue cures, I love how so much of Minami's character is told visually through her facial expressions. Throughout this episode, she's had little moments where you can really read how she's feeling, like lonely, happy, or even inspired by this little goober. And yeah, she's kind of spelling things out here, but that was after we could draw out most of our own inclusions from this. Anyway, it was about time for yet another amazing fight of the week. This time, Close chose a soccer player's dream of winning the big game. Well, at least they're not taking up a whole episode this time. And again, while the animation here was great as usual, they also include a really good subtle touch here with Haruka focusing on using just her good leg throughout. However, she eventually ended up delivering an ill-advised dropkick that re-injured her ankle. Fortunately, Minami came in with the save while also revealing that she had seen Haruka transform. She also noticed how her ki kind of looked familiar.
学園のみんなを守るのが生徒会長。あなたに屈したりしない。
Again, a really nice transformation sequence, though I do wonder why she decided to turn it into an @ sign here, but whatever, Laura owns a freaking tablet, maybe it's just a thing with mermaids. And again, a really good debut fight. I especially love this cut, provided by the legend Nishiki Itaoka. However, distracted by all of the good animation, the fairies unknowingly dropped the last perfume bottle, ending the episode on a cliffhanger. That little issue would have to be addressed later though, as the following episode focused more on Puff. Oh, and this is episode 3, in case you were wondering. But yeah, the dorm leader Kisaragi was running a tight ship and was making sure everyone did their part. Fortunately, they also had some help from the student council vice president and secretary. Well, I think we found the real Haruka of this show. However, during her search for the missing perfume, Puff ended up revealing herself to Kisaragi. Of course, Haruka tried to convince everyone to let them keep her, but Kisaragi and her long fingers, seriously, Phoenix Wright is envious of that digit, pointed out that it was against the dorm rules to keep pets. Fortunately, the dorm mother Shirogane and her very awkward introduction left the final decision to Minami.
新たなルールを作るときは寮生全員の賛同を得る。ここはみんなの考えを確かめましょう。
I kind of want to make a joke here, but yeah, let's stay away from politics for at least the next few years. In any case, they decided to make it so that everyone could make their final decision in a week, and a unanimous decision would decide whether or not Puff could stay. Over the week, Haruka managed to convince almost everyone to vote in favor of keeping Puff, except for Kisaragi, who revealed that she was afraid of dogs. Thus, it would end up taking a monster attack to convince her, though this time not just by clothes, but rather this flamboyant dude named... did anyone else hear a different word when he said that? But yeah, Ainz here decided to use a judo artist as his first victim of the week. Haruka and Minami engaged in, while Puff helped rescue Kisaragi. However, so as not to be shown up by his cohort, Close created his own sock to go against Shot's throw. Of course, Puff tried to defend Kisaragi, and should I be concerned about how much dogs get beat up in this franchise? Regardless, her efforts won Kisaragi over, and Haruka and Minami came in for the save. Also, yeah, the animation throughout this episode wasn't all that great, at least compared to the previous two. I mean, it still wasn't bad, especially by today's standards, but still... I'm defeated! With that, they rescued one of the victims, I guess the other guy just fell out of his cage, and the episode ended with Puff becoming the official pet mascot of the dorm, and the reveal of where the last perfume was. And as it just so happened, Kirara decided to take a bunch of pictures with it for a magazine. I hope she got approval from the manufacturers first. And seeing how good she looked with it, they decided that she'd make the perfect third member of this team, which, yeah, that's a great way to decide on your superheroines there, guys. Thankfully, this would be somewhat lampshaded throughout the episode. Anyway, the two cures tried to introduce themselves to their potential teammate. Pretty sure that's a different character who hasn't appeared in the show proper yet. Anyway, she made it very clear that she was a busy girl and even somehow shoot off Minami of all people, jeez. They retried after school only to learn that Kirara had left for her modeling gig in the neighboring town. While looking for her, they partook in some donuts from a mobile shop. Thankfully, as far as I could tell, this was not a tie-in product. No, that sort of aggressive marketing would start until the following season and would never stop. Hooray for diabetes. Fortunately, they just so happened to sit down right where Kirara's photo shoot was taking place. Funny, you would think they would try to clear out the area first, but whatever, maybe they're working on a shoestring budget. And not that it really mattered, as Close soon arrived to launch an attack to prevent them from recruiting Kirara as the third cure for their team. Minami and Haruka managed to make quick work of his monster, but ironically enough, Close somewhat succeeded with his mission.
じゃあこれ返すわ。あんなの相手してる暇ないし。それじゃね。
I absolutely love this scene, as not only was it hilarious, but it also was a perfect character establishing moment for Kirara, showing that she's a realist who wants to prioritize what's important to her, which right now doesn't include heroics. Though, one thing that kind of bothers me now that I'm rewatching this is this line.
楽屋にあったから誰かからのプレゼントかと思ってたけど。
How? I mean, we clearly saw them drop it on the beach, so did someone like pick it up and give it to Kirara? Or did the perfume itself go straight to her? The latter actually seems kind of likely considering what else appears later in that same dressing room, but it would have been nice if we had gotten some sort of line or scene to indicate this. Anyway, the two still weren't giving up and thus tried again to convince her at a fashion show they were holding that night. By the way, the name of this fashion show was... Oh, come on! Yuki's family already has a whole galaxy named after them. Did they really need a fashion show to go with that? Haruka managed to catch Kirara during her break and run her over with those same donuts from before. Oh, believe me, these fried little rings, they're gonna become a lot more significant by the end of this review. It was also a scene where Kirara shared her dream with Haruka.
天の川キララはまだまだ大きくなるんだから。
Though before Haruka could share hers, the show restarted and just as quickly ended with Close launched a second attack for the episode, believing that Kirara still had the perfume on her. Of course, she had already relinquished it, but Close ended up tempting her.
大切な賞を台無しにして。そん
なの知るか!
This guy is a treasure. And in a moment of pure badassery, an unsuperpowered Kirara managed to operate a crane to throw a tarp on the Zetsuborg. In some ways, it was almost as good as her actual fight with the monster. Yeah, as I pointed out, she managed to find her key in the dressing room.
天の川キララの夢はこの星空みたいキラキラ輝いてるんだから。
天の道を生き、すべてを司る男。天道、掃除。
And using that same crane, she managed to deliver one hell of a rider kick before finishing it off. Nice. With that, Haruka and Minami revealed their secret identities to their new teammate.
二人がプリキュアだったんだ。
Roll credits.
Thankfully, that wasn't the case, otherwise we would have missed out on this great ending.
これから一緒に頑張ろうね。え？頑張らないよ。
You wouldn't think the same joke would work twice in the same episode, but everyone's reactions plus Kirara's very nonchalant attitude kind of made it even funnier the second time around. Episode 5 opened with Haruka saying that she still wanted to recruit Kirara even though she had now turned him down twice. And sure enough, third time wasn't a charm. However, she did let Haruka follow her around after school, where she learned how the young fashion model was partaking in more extracurricular activities than any middle schooler ever should, but yet remained an absolute professional throughout. And while I would question if there even exists this many hours in the day, especially after school, I do think it really helps to paint Kirara early on as a strong, proactive character, showing that if you want to achieve a dream of any sort, you do have to kind of put in the work, which Kirara does from a very practical standpoint to say the least. Her day wrapped up with an interview with a very stereotypical fashion designer. Man, the years have not been kind to the pilot of the Rose Gundam. Though apparently this guy is supposed to be based off of a real-life German designer named Karl Lagerfeld, and yeah, I'm surprised no one was sued. Anyway, he wanted to find a model who could shine, or as he put it,
一番キラキラしてる姿を見せて。
キラキラしたいわ。思いっきりクリスタルドレス。みんな大好きよ。
Anyone else waiting for Marie Antoinette to become a pretty-cure? However, none of the models, including Kirara, seemed to satisfy his expectations, so they needed to rework her dress.
星だよ星。天の川さんがプリキュアになった時のドレス。
Haruka, you do know that secret identities are supposed to kind of be a thing when it comes to the pretty-cure, right? Anyway, they redesigned it to look more like her pre-cure persona, which won over the designer and his terrifying kitty. Seriously, what kind of demon out of hell is that? Kirara thanked Haruka for her help, who, while disappointed she wasn't able to recruit her into their ranks, fully understood the fashion model's choice, as it was clear she was putting her all into her dream in a really nice little scene.
私の全力100%は出せたよ。ハルハルのおかげで120%かな。
Oh, come on, we all know you're supposed to put 1000% into everything, no matter how statistically impossible that is. Over the next few days, it was clear that Haruka had left an impression on her, maybe a little bit too much of an impression.
オーディションはどうだったの？
まだ返事来てない。
それで浮かない顔してるの？
When the two waifus meet, sparks are gonna fly. Seriously, I can't be the only one who's detecting just the slightest amount of passive-aggressive smugness from Minami here, right? Anyway, the two ended up talking about the Mana Ida in training, with Kia in particular starting to realize how she had helped her both with her dress and just being a general inspiration to her. This especially hit her once she was informed that she had passed the audition, and yet realized she couldn't take full credit for it. Later, Close launched another attack. Can you figure out a way to balance out this company's finances? Take that as a no. Minami and Haruka weren't agile enough to approach the monster, but fortunately, a certain shooting star was on her way. Kia finally joined the team and defeated the monster. Close didn't want to deal with them himself, but... Oh, believe me, that reference is gonna become a lot more clear in just a minute. With Kirara's arrival, not only was the team complete, but all three started referring to each other in more casual terms, ending the episode on a sweet and, yes, very Yuri ending.
私の100%を200% にすればいいだけだよ。
Still not 1000%! The sixth episode opened with everyone admiring the two most charismatic students in the academy, while wondering who the hell the girl with the symbolic flower bud on her head was. Fortunately for Haruka, this is also the introduction episode for their new princess instructor, as well as my favorite supporting character in the show. After some very blatant product placement, they used the princess pad to summon for Miss Shamour.
ごきげんよう、everyone! ロイヤルティーチャーシャムールよ。
Every time I hear her voice, all I can think about is combat electric guitars or Beethoven's Fifth Symphony losing out to J-pop. What has anime done to me? But yeah, this English-spouting kitty that the subtitles decided to replace with French was going to teach them the ways of princesshood. Minami and Kia managed to breeze through their first lesson with ease. FYI, I use that line for my notifications. Ooh, discount on Rocky Road. By the end of the day, it became fairly clear who was the furthest away from achieving actual princesshood, with Haruka even admitting that she wasn't living up to her role model, which of course turned out to be her little fairy tale princess.
小さい頃からずっと憧れてて。
I actually really like this aspect of Haruka. They establish early on that she's not perfect, and yet that she constantly strives to be better. The fact she's constantly called a flower bud or tsubomi seems to even harken back to one of her predecessors. It is a very relatable character trait that has been given the time it needs to properly be established. You know, as opposed to just make her out to be the fool most of the time, not naming any names. Fortunately, she got a little encouragement from her old fling.
ごきげんよう。
はじめまして。僕はプリンスホープグランドカナタ。
That was a bit of a lukewarm greeting compared to Haruka there, Princey. Yeah, I know I just complimented Haruka's arc, but this little bit with Kanata does illustrate a bit of an issue with the show, but more on that later. For now, he told them about D-Stark and how they overtook his kingdom, and in order to defeat them, they of course would have to partake in a little fetch quest, aka blatant product placement. Specifically, they needed the 12 keys that had been used by the ancient Princess Precure to seal the Gate of Despair, and yeah, feel free to place your Kingdom Hearts and or Danganronpa references here. The keys would also unlock their final forms as the Grand Princesses, which they would kind of need if they wanted to defeat the Queen herself, Despair.
プリンセスプリキュアの復活を許すとはなんと愚か。
If the sound of Hamon Karn's voice doesn't intimidate you in the slightest, you, my friend, are a much braver soul than me. Having seen these two fail already, she decided to deploy the last of the three generals, Locke, who seemed to be into retro games. Nice. Thus, for his first victim, he chose a baseball player. Right before they went to deal with it, Kanta gave Haruka some last words of encouraging, pointing out how the first key went specifically to her, hence why he gave it to her. Again, a nice scene and everything, but it also does kind of paint Haruka a bit too much as the chosen one. I mean, obviously Minami and Kiara's keys chose them too, but that was after they were into their teens, as well as after the keys were forced to flee the kingdom due to D-Stark's attack. Haruka, on the other hand, got hers long before the onset of this conflict and while she was still in kindergarten. A pink lead should have larger stakes in the main conflict, but not so much that it feels like the world itself is playing favorites. There's a delicate balance to all of it. Still, at least we got the best part of this episode with the series' first trio transformation. As not only were all three sequences fairly well mixed together, we also got the absolutely amazing effect of all three background flourishes combined into one. Just beautiful stuff. Of course, Haruka was the star of this fight, which to be fair, was earned, and she even acknowledged her status of still being a budding flower, but one that would soon develop. A nice episode overall with some good world building, though just a tad bit too much Haruka worshipping, which would kind of continue unfortunately. Episode 7 was the requisite sports festival episode for most anime like this. Hey, it could be worse, at least she's not treating you like she would a pine cone. Specifically, they were playing ball games with Haruka choosing tennis because you gotta fulfill those stereotypes. To be exact, she and many tennis anime are likely influenced by the classic manga Aim for the Ace. That's from Aim for the Top, the Gainax mech anime that references Ace. Oh god, I'm a weeb. Anyway, since these were co-ed games, Haruka wasn't going to be paired with her One-sama, but rather this guy named Yuki.
Yuki. 僕の名は Yuki.
Oh, if only that were the case.
いいだろ別に。テニスが俺を呼んでんだよ。
The very second you perform your first dab, you can say goodbye to your social life, kid. To his credit, Yuki did the smart thing and tried to measure his partner's skills, and once again, Haruka proved that she had bitten off more than she could chew. While rightfully criticizing her over this, both soon realized they had met each other, specifically all the way back in kindergarten. Yeah, Dabbers here was one of the boys who had bullied her, and while he had thankfully grown out of it, Haruka hadn't completely gotten over it and took it out on Minami's ankles. Yeah, girls, sometimes you really should question whether or not it's all worth it in the end. Anyway, while Yuki had matured, he also wasn't exactly a team player and insisted that Haruka just let him solo the game. Wanting to prove him wrong, our pink lead turned to Miss Shamour for some private lessons, where we also got to see the Kei's human form for the first time. A good design that gets across how she's a loyal teacher. Though I do question how she maintains those massive twin tails without any ties. Anyway, Haruka managed to improve her game and even got some help from her teammates. In the process, she also realized something important Yuki had said. I liked that they're not making Yuki out to be a total jerk here. I mean, don't get me wrong, what he said was still awful, but it was also clear that he wanted to prove his skills and worth as a tennis player, as opposed to Haruka, who was mostly using this game as a stepping stone towards becoming a princess, and chose to play it in spite of having zero experience with the sport. This was another case where Haruka had to learn that her idealized princessdom would require actual work, much like what Yuki was putting in. Also, hi Coach Oda! Seriously, was someone on staff just really into Gainax anime or something? The next day, the sports festival was going well for all of the cures, including Haruka, but Shut soon showed up and of course used Yuki as the victim of the week. Ironically, much like what Yuki was going to do originally, Haruka ended up soloing most of the fight while her teammates were busy with the evacuations. This led into some of the more impressive sequences for her since the first episode. I don't know, I just really like these pedal-filled punches, it's a nice effect. Anyway, they defeated the monster, and the sports festival just kind of continued, even after all of that.
俺たち夢でも見たのかな。
まあ何事もなくてよかったじゃない。
Jeez, it really has come to the point where the Pre-Q universe has just become jaded to all of these monster attacks. The episode ended with Yuki admitting that Haruka could become the Princess of Flowers after having seen one who kind of matched that description. FYI, this was also the very first Pre-Cure episode written by Junko Komura, whom, as I've mentioned, has become quite the staple of the Toei writing team, and she would also play a very big part in this season too. And as a first outing, this was a strong start, showing a fairly balanced perspective for both Haruka and Yuki. Yes, the latter was a bit of a jerk, but it was clear that the former was also being naive when trying to approach something she was unfamiliar with. I really like how Komura highlights the faults in everyone's perspectives, including the Precure themselves, which would really hit hard later in this season. Following this, we got an episode where our heroines began prepping for an upcoming dance party. Haruka in particular wanted to take on a more hands-on approach by designing her own dress. Thus, she once again turned to Miss Shamour for help, and okay, how many different pocket dimensions does this cat have? And how is she able to furnish it all? She had a fully equipped and customized tennis court, and now a huge wardrobe with like thousands of dollars worth of dresses. Are fairies just like some of the savviest economists in the world or something? And if that's the case, can they do my taxes for me? Anyway, Haruka once again turned to her personal Bible, the Princess of Flowers, for her initial dress designs. From there, her friends helped her gather the basic core elements.
やっぱハルハルはピンクじゃない？そうってことはピンクの私は悪党をやっつける正義の変身ヒロイン？
Having gotten all she needed, for free by the way, Haruka began work on her dress, which ended up affecting her studies, I think.
最近勉強に身が入ってないそうね。
Again, factoring pink attributes, is this really below the average for her? Okay, but seriously, it did seem like she was putting way too much on her plate, that workaholic Kirara of all people tried to point out. I mean, to be fair, she did have a lot more experience with juggling a ton of stuff at once, unlike Haruka, who decided to proceed with her current routine, which produced predictable results. Things only got more complicated after a little slip-up.
これ洗っても取れないよ。
And just use one of those tie pins, they'll come right out. Though, I'll assume it wouldn't easily come out of that particular material, so Haruka had to redo that part of the dress. Fortunately though, Kirara offered to help.
これは自分でやるよ。最後まで自分の力でやりたいの。
Technically, Yuri did most of the work. You designed it, you knitted it. Any sort of redos would fall outside of your original projections, and therefore shouldn't really be considered as a part of your princess training. I mean, I get they wanted to show how determined she can be, like with the last episode, but as I said, they also tried to balance things out by bringing up some of the impracticality of Haruka trying to jump into something she had zero experience with. Trying to redo part of her dress alone and clearly suffering from sleep deprivation is very impractical and certainly not something she should feel obligated to do. Worst part of it all is that, as you can kind of tell, this is also kind of a Kirara episode, and they're portraying it like she's in the wrong for calling Haruka crazy for trying to do these last minute fixes, which yeah, it kind of is. And you know, I haven't really minded the fact that these last 3 episodes have been very Haruka focused. I mean, she is the lead cure, so she does need a little more attention than the others. I just have to kind of eject when things start to become too centered on one character's morality and viewpoint. Haruka should be taking advice from someone who has much better understanding of time and stress management, but nope, she's just gonna do it all on her own, and spoilers, it'll succeed somehow. It even kind of goes against some of the previous episode morals, like the second episode where Haruka injured herself because she pushed herself beyond her skill level, and yet even Minami is approving of all of this, like, what? Anyway, Locke launched another attack using one of the cooks for the dance party as his victim. Kirara reasonably suggested they keep their exhausted leader out of this fight, but of course she soon joined in. And honestly, I do like how Haruka acknowledged all of the help she got from her friends, from Minami's indirect mentorship to Kirara's worrying about her, which she ultimately disregarded. On its own, it actually is a nice moment, but I just wish the moral wasn't delivered so one-sidedly. Still, if anything, at least Kirara had her moments in this episode, including using one of my favorite Street Fighter attacks. And some decent Yuri at the end. This was of course followed up by the dance party in the next episode. This was also one where Despair apparently gave Close one last chance to prove his worth, or else. Oh yeah, right. I mean, we're only like 9 episodes in. They're not just gonna kill off the first general this early into the series, right? Back at the dance party, everyone was doing your standard prom-esque fare, dancing, drinking, non-alcoholic beverages. and of course chowing down, which led to some Yuki shipping that was sunk just as quickly, thankfully. However, Minami couldn't enjoy any of the festivities as she was still busy managing the party even after it was underway. She didn't have time to rescue Haruka again, who, geez girl, stop making my feet wince with your all too realistic animation. She also had time to express her aspirations in trying to live up to the hardworking legacies of her father and brother. However, when asked if that was also her dream,
夢そうね
meanwhile, this Nabishin-looking fella who was recording the dance party became closest victim of the week. The resulting Zetsuborg was of course a camera, and wait, what does that say? Ore Sanjo? Considering this was written by Jin Tanaka, I wouldn't be surprised if Deno just showed up out of nowhere. Anyway, they cut the power to the hall, forcing the student council to go inspect the storage room. This was in spite of the rumors that there were ghosts in there, which Minami didn't take too well, as we would later learn she had a little phobia of specters because of an incident with Sarah back when they were kids. Sure enough, since the Zetsuborg was made from an aspiring horror director, it could project ghosts, albeit ones less threatening than Boo's, but... Kon wishes he was as over-the-top hammy as this guy, and that he had the same fangirl bases as him. Still, she engaged the monster with some of the best animation of the season. Like, seriously, I do think this is amazing and everything, but is this sort of comedy fight really the one you want to use the amazing Sakuga on, as opposed to the next episode, which also has good animation and everything, but nowhere near this, and that's going to be more story-driven. Anyway, her friends came in to help her, leading into a nice Haruka/Minami scene.
今日は私学園のプリンセスを守るナイトになります
Yeah, kinda makes that previous scene with Yuki feel even more pointless. Together, they defeated the Zetsuborg, while Kirara was just kind of there. With that, the party resumed, and the episode ended exactly the way you think it would.
踊りましょうナイトさんと踊れてるわよありがとうはるか
Just already!
Episode 10 opened with the girls getting a call from Kanata. He informed them that they managed to pinpoint the location of the next batch of dress-up keys, which just so happened to be at the Noble Academy.
Oh, how convenient!
They looked all over, but found nothing. Thus, they tried asking Shirogane for help, but as always, she somehow managed to fade into the shadows like a ninja. I would buy her more than the team who debuted that same season. Still, Haruka managed to learn about some of her unusual Sunday morning activities from Yuri that seemed to involve a mysterious key. Of course, the Four Eyes, who had kind of faded into the background after the first few episodes of the season, wanted to join in, but Haruka lied and tried to turn her away.
ゆいちゃんごめんね
The Precure followed Shirogane into the woods, where her clothes also just so happened to be, and wait, that stuff with Disappear actually stuck? Well, I'm sure the status quo will reset with him crawling back to his master by the end of the episode. Right? Back with the Precure, they literally managed to stumble upon a hidden passage that led them to a hidden garden. As it turned out, this was a place where graduates of the academy would perform a sort of secret rite of passage by planting flowers and writing their dreams on the tiles of a water wheel house. Shirogane was the very first person to perform this rite and had been maintaining the secret garden ever since. Yeah, Lee, there is such a thing as being too dedicated to the dream, just saying. Jokes aside, this did lead into a nice montage showing the creation of this house that was literally made of dreams. Sure enough, this was the place where the dress-up keys had taken up residence. However, it also became a prime target for Close, who decided to create his strongest Zetsuborg so far to get back into Disappear's good graces. Shirogane kinda became the victim of the week, even though technically the actual catalyst was the water wheel house itself. To make matters worse, Yui had followed them and was now caught in the middle of all of this. Left with no other options, they ended up transforming in front of her. From there, they tried to make quick work of the monster, but again, this guy was made from technically multiple dreams. Fortunately, their desires to protect those same dreams of those who came before them provided a little support with the light of the new keys coming out from... Yeah, you should probably go see a doctor about that, dude. taking advantage of the worst case of hemorrhoids ever, they defeated the Zetsuborg with a triple finisher, which I will say, I love this little detail of the Precure saying their usual gokigenyo to each other. That's cute. With that, they rescued Shirogane, who I actually hope was locked in one of those despair cages, otherwise she probably would have been conscious and shaking around during that entire fight, which, yeah. And of course, they got their new keys all at once, no less. So, yeah, the day was won, right? Going right into the next episode, with the final boss seemingly right in front of them, Kirara got the bright idea to try and defeat this spear just 12 episodes into this show. Even if it wasn't an illusion, I wouldn't try to attack Integra Hellsing unless I had Death Wish. Yet surprisingly, she seemed to be in a good mood and allowed Close one more final chance to defeat the Precure after he got on his knees and begged. To be fair, I'd give anyone who makes faces like this as many chances as possible. She even provided her underling with a proper battlefield by warping all of them, including Yuri, to a pocket dimension. As a result, Yuri was made further privy to her friend's secrets through a really fun exchange with the fairies.
Oh my god! You can talk!
Though they wouldn't have much time to talk, as the spear had created some color-coded Zetsuborgs for the Cures to fight alongside Close, who were all stronger in this dimension. In the particular case of the general himself. Can somebody call Guy Shishio? Soldat J has gone crazy over all those J juices. They of course tried to counter with their new keys, but I guess they forgot to change out the batteries. Well, actually, they would only work with their new toys. Yeah, you have to kind of admire when they're not even being subtle about this stuff. Thankfully, this was somewhat made up for by Yui proving to be a total badass normal by volunteering to deliver them to her friends. Meanwhile, Minami and Kia managed to kind of anticlimactically defeat their respective Mii bosses, though at least we know what happened to them. I'm not sure what happened to the pink Zetsuborg that was chasing Yui. Even the wiki lists his fate as unknown. Maybe found better work in the next Kirby game. I bet Man Knight pays really well. And no big deal really, because the real fight was elsewhere. At this point, Close had not only become a human-sized King Jader, but also a full-on JoJo character. Fortunately, the team regrouped, and as they've said a lot throughout this first core of the series now that I think about it, they weren't about to give up. Y'all do know that's the line they say right before a show or manga is about to be cancelled, right? I mean, I know the show is going to be a financial flop, but you don't have to rush it. Fortunately, that line plus a reassertion of their dreams opened a warp gate to Kanata. To stop them from getting their new armaments, Close further powered up into a fluffier version of Noise. Yeah, seriously dude, you looked a lot stronger as a JoJo character. Still, at least it lets me do this. And when all seemed lost, the real MVP of this episode proved her worth by not only rescuing Haruka, but also getting the whole team to rally. Just don't turn into a full-on yandere on us, and we'll be good. With that, they reopened the gate that allowed Kanata to pass on the princess rods that they even rendered in very realistic 3D just in case Daddy needed to get a really good look at what he needed to buy for his daughter. With them, they unlocked new forms and new team finisher to defeat Close. Yep, they killed off one of the main generals of the show really early on, and I'm sure he'll never come back. You know, in spite of all the Phoenix references I made throughout this. Also, really good animation here. You can just read Haruka's emotions as though she kind of regretted killing off her first general. With that, they were released from the pocket dimension, and Yui declared herself the team's new confidant. With that, we roll into the last episode we'll cover for today, which I will admit is a filler episode. But one, I think 12 is a much better number to end on than 11, and two, this is one of my favorite episodes of the entire season. After such an intense mid-boss fight, the Gears were understandably ready to take a break, especially Kia, whose manager wanted to give her a new reporter gig right off the bat. However, she managed to lure her in with the thing that I'm pretty sure most models should avoid consuming altogether. Also, it's worth mentioning that at this point in the series, the crowd behind Haruka in the opening had massively ballooned with all of the recurring characters joining in. This episode would also see the addition of one more in the form of this recurring reference in the franchise, Ranko Ichijo.
テレビの世界で光り輝くスターになるの。足を引っ張らないでよね。
Oh, so this is the world line where Maho decided to become an idol instead of a scientist. Yeah, I'll just say right now, Ranko was easily the best part of this whole episode. I just love how throughout it, she tried to upstage her co-host by putting on a cutesy facade while underneath she was a smug little brat. Sayuri Yahagi really deserves a lot of praise for pulling the two-faced nature of this character off so perfectly. Now, of course, characters like this can run the risk of being too manipulative, annoying, or just plain unlikable. But the thing about Ranko is that she can kind of back up her smugness. She knew how to play to the camera and appeal to an audience. Something that more straightforward and technically minded fashion model like Kirara couldn't keep up with. Thus, it made her fake cuteness both hilarious and yet kind of admirable, as at least she knew her craft. And I think even the Precure staff came to really like the character, as not only would she make a few more appearances throughout this season, but as I said, she'd also be given at least a few more slight references in future seasons of the franchise. In general, I would say this is one of the outright funniest episodes of the entire franchise really, with even the non-spotlight gears joining in, like Haruka having a running gag of her constantly trying to get noticed by the cameras by wearing more and more ribbons, or Minami delivering some great dry humor, which we'll get to in just a minute. But first, we reach one of the greatest moments of this entire series. Having entered into an actual competition to see who was the better reporter, it all came down to a race where the two would put on costumes that they had just designed. Yeah, somehow they managed to produce these within what couldn't have been more than an hour, like, how?
There's a simple explanation for that.
Anyway, Ranko's Konjou Donuts-kun design proved to be more than a little impractical. This, along with Kirara's better cardio, allowed her to easily win this epic race that even had some borderline copyright infringing Rocky music playing in the background. However, even though she had lost the competition, Ranko, if anything, wanted to stick it out with the characters she had designed, who no one could get the name of right, and finish the race. And hey, since they already did Rocky, why not throw in another boxing reference on top of that? I honestly can't believe this franchise has referenced the heavily implied death of a character not once, but twice. You spoil me sometimes, Precure. Anyway, Shut somewhat justifiably wanted to break up all of this insanity, so he chose Ranko as his victim of the week, resulting in the outright hamminess of her dream shocking both him and our protagonist. Oh god, I love Minami's expression here. And this resulted in one of my favorite fights of the season. I mean, yeah, the animation here was great as usual, but honestly, I could care less about that, as again, Minami's flat reactions to everything stole the show. It's also worth mentioning that this was the first time we got to see them use the abilities of their new weapons outside of finishers, giving each of them some excellent practicality, but whatever, can we see everyone's faces again? With that, they rescued Ranko, and the episode ended with the Cures learning that not only did she go to the same school as them, but she was also a third year. Yes, Ranko was a year older than Minami. I mean, granted, Minami doesn't exactly look like a middle schooler herself, but that would also make her 2 years older than Haruka. Actually, why am I acting so surprised? This is pretty much a thing when it comes to Sayuri Yahagi's characters. Oh, and speaking of Haruka, the cameraman never did get a good shot of her and her many ribbons.
Wah, wah, wah.
And I think that's the perfect note to end this first part on. This series is just plain fun, and while some elements haven't aged as gracefully like some of the stuff involving Haruka, other stuff has actually gotten better with age, like the action and comedy, especially compared to some of the more recent stuff. It really is unfortunate that this series ended up becoming a bit of an acclaimed flop, as there is a lot to like, even if you did take away the allegedly overly violent fight animation. All of the characters, be them heroes, villains, or even one-off side characters, were at least fairly likable and well developed for the screen time they were afforded. As I very briefly pointed out, Jin Tanaka handled the series composition here, and while it certainly has a lot of his trademark snark and cynicism towards the magical girl genre, it also featured some of his great character writing. Everyone had a personality, and more importantly, goals, or dreams if you really want to be pedantic. For all of the characters, they would stop at almost nothing to achieve them, resulting in almost everyone being at least endearing no matter how selfish or even outright villainous they were. Though, the thing about dreams is that you do also have to keep a realistic perspective on it, which thankfully was also highlighted here, especially when it came to our main characters. Minami acknowledged she still had a ways to go when it came to matching with her father and brother's skills, while Kirara put together a very tight schedule to manage her early modeling career. And while Haruka's princess dream was still kinda vague by this point in the show, she was at least putting in the effort into the essentials like good fitness and education, which thankfully was shown and not just told to us. Thus, while I did have some issues with the dressmaking episode, seeing an actually exhausted pink lead was quite the sight in more ways than one. It showed that these superheroines are still very much human and do have problems they needed to overcome. Yes, I had issues with the show sometimes making her out to be the chosen one a little too much, at least when compared to her teammates, but that didn't stop Haruka herself from being a great character. And of course, like many chosen ones, all of this would come back to bite her later. All in all, this was a great first quarter to the series with a lot going on. Again, it was surprising for a general to be defeated so early on, but stuff like that and Haruka's struggles would have some great payoff a little later. This series of reviews will continue, but first I need to make a little overview for a recently concluded series. I've got a lot to say about Healing Good, both good and bad, so look forward to that. In the meantime though, do check out my weekly reviews of the latest series, Tropical Rouge, which, yeah, kind of does look a little familiar, don't it? And until next time, farewell for now, my friends, and let us all take a moment to remember the fighting spirit of one brave donut. Okay, that moment's passed.